Ethan Cole thought the briefcase he found in a rain-soaked alley was nothing more than forgotten trash. But inside were photographs, hundreds of them, each face scratched out with a red X. At first, the strangers meant nothing, until he saw the last picture. It was of himself, taken through the window of his apartment just the night before. I never thought one small decision could change everything. That night was like any other. The streets were damp from an earlier rain, the kind that left the pavement glistening beneath the dim yellow glow of street lamps. The air smelled faintly of wet concrete and trash, a usual scent in my neighborhood. I had stayed out later than usual, wandering back from a convenience store with a plastic bag of snacks, when I noticed something strange in the alley behind my building. At first, I thought it was just another pile of discarded junk that littered the city. But as my eyes adjusted, I realized it wasn't just trash. It was a battered leather briefcase, sitting neatly upright, as though someone had placed it there with care. Something about it unsettled me. The leather was cracked, the corners frayed, and the handle bent at an odd angle as if it had been yanked violently. Even from a distance I could see the lock on it was smeared with something dark, glistening faintly in the light. I told myself it was grease, or maybe mud. But deep inside, I couldn't shake the thought of blood. For a few seconds I hesitated, standing frozen, debating whether to walk away. The alley was silent, save for the occasional drip of water from a rusted pipe. My instinct screamed at me to ignore it, yet something stronger, curiosity, perhaps, pulled me closer. I crouched beside the briefcase, my heart beating a little faster now. When I touched the handle, the cold leather seemed to stick to my fingers. The lock was broken, hanging loose, as if it had been forced open. I swallowed hard and slowly lifted the lid. The smell hit me first. It wasn't rot, but there was something unpleasant, like old paper mixed with mold. Inside, stacked neatly, were photographs, dozens of them. They were all black and white, glossy prints, their edges curled slightly with age. I pulled one out and held it under the dim streetlight. It was a photograph of a man I didn't know, an ordinary-looking guy, maybe in his 30s, standing in what looked like a grocery store aisle. Across his eyes, a thick red X had been drawn with a marker. I frowned and pulled another photo. This one showed a woman, sitting on a park bench, same red X slashed across her eyes. My stomach began to twist as I shuffled through them, photo after photo, each one featuring a stranger, and each one defaced in the same chilling way. None of the people were smiling. They all looked like they were being watched, unaware of the camera, caught in everyday moments of their lives. I couldn't understand why someone would keep these. Were they random targets, victims? The thought made my skin crawl. I wanted to put the photos back and leave, but my hands moved on their own, pulling out more. And then I froze. Near the bottom of the pile, I found one that wasn't of a stranger. My throat tightened as I stared at it, unable to breathe. It was me. I was standing at my own kitchen window, the curtains drawn just slightly open. The photo wasn't old, it had been taken recently, maybe last night. I recognized the shirt I was wearing, the faint reflection of my lamp behind me. My hands began to shake as I turned the photo over, hoping for some explanation, but the back was blank. I dropped it into the briefcase, my palms slick with sweat. Every hair on my body stood on end. Someone had been watching me. Someone had been close enough to photograph me inside my own home. The thought alone made me feel sick. I snapped the briefcase shut, the echo of the metal latch too loud in the silence of the alley. For a moment, I thought I heard movement further down the darkness, but when I looked, nothing was there. Only shadows shifting with the flickering streetlight. I told myself it had to be a prank, maybe some twisted art project or discarded junk that ended up in the wrong place. Still, I couldn't leave it behind. Some part of me needed answers. With trembling hands, I picked up the briefcase and hurried back toward my apartment. Each step echoed louder than the last, bouncing off the brick walls, following me all the way up to my building. Inside, I locked the door, bolted it twice, and leaned against it, trying to catch my breath. My apartment felt different, heavy, as though I had brought something in that didn't belong. I carried the briefcase to my kitchen table and placed it there, staring at it like it might open on its own. The clock on the wall ticked slowly, the sound stabbing through the silence. I sat there for what felt like hours, my mind running in circles, replaying the images of those strangers' faces, the X across their eyes, and my own reflection staring back at me from the photograph. That night, I barely moved. I didn't eat, didn't turn on the TV. I just sat there, the briefcase in front of me like a silent threat. But no matter how hard I tried to convince myself it meant nothing, I couldn't shake the feeling that opening it had been a mistake. And deep down, I knew something had already started, something I couldn't undo. When I finally dragged myself to bed, exhausted, I left the briefcase shut in the living room. But as I turned off the lights and stared into the darkness, a thought sank deep into me like a hook. If someone had taken that photo of me in my kitchen window, then they were close enough to see everything, which meant they might still be watching. And with that thought, I realized I would never feel safe again. I didn't sleep that night. Every sound in my apartment seemed louder than usual. Every creak in the floorboards, every groan of the pipes. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the steady rhythm of my own heartbeat, terrified that I might hear footsteps that weren't mine. The image of that photograph haunted me, one of me standing in my kitchen window. Someone had been close enough to take it. Someone had been outside, watching me through the glass. That knowledge sat heavy on my chest like a weight I couldn't push off. When the morning came, I felt worse, not better. The sunlight that filtered through my curtains seemed weak, pale, like it had been drained of all comfort. I forced myself out of bed, moving through my apartment with unease, checking every window, every corner, making sure the locks were still secure. I even opened closets and looked under the bed, though I knew it was useless. Whoever had left that photograph could have been anywhere. I tried to go about my day, but the feeling of being watched never left me. I couldn't shake the thought that hidden cameras might be planted around my apartment. It seemed crazy, but I searched anyway. I unscrewed vents, checked behind picture frames, looked under the counters. Nothing. No devices, no wires, no evidence. Yet the sensation only grew stronger. It was as though invisible eyes followed me with every move I made. By the time night fell again, my nerves were shredded. The city outside seemed unnaturally quiet, muffled, as though it was holding its breath along with me. I left the briefcase shoved into the closet, trying to convince myself it was out of sight, out of mind. But late into the night, as I sat in the living room with the TV on low, I saw something that froze me in place. There, on the kitchen floor, were muddy footprints. My breath caught in my throat as I stared at them. They weren't mine. I hadn't left the apartment all day. The print started near the back door, damp and heavy, then trailed slowly across the tiles. Each step was smudged, as though the person had moved carefully, quietly, trying not to be noticed. I followed them with my eyes, heart pounding harder with each one, until they disappeared down the hallway toward my bedroom. For a long time, I couldn't move. My body refused to respond, trapped in a state between panic and disbelief. I wanted to run, to fling open the door and escape into the night, but terror glued me to the spot. Whoever had left those footprints had come inside. They had walked through my apartment, through my space, without me knowing. The silence around me felt like a trap, as if someone was still here, standing just out of sight, waiting. Finally, I forced myself to move backward, inching toward the front door. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the keys as I fumbled with the locks. I didn't hear anyone, didn't see anyone, but my fear was blinding. I had almost opened the door when I saw something that made my stomach twist into knots. The briefcase. It was no longer in the closet where I had hidden it. It was sitting in the middle of the living room floor, its lid wide open. I froze. My breath came out in shallow bursts as I turned my head, staring at it in disbelief. Slowly, against my will, I moved closer. Inside, the photographs were scattered, not stacked neatly as before, and lying on top of the pile was a new picture. It was me. I was lying in bed, asleep. My face was turned toward the camera, my body tangled in the sheets. The photograph looked fresh, the details sharp. My pulse throbbed in my ears as I realized the truth. Someone had been in my bedroom while I slept. Someone had stood over me, close enough to hear me breathe, and taken that picture. The room tilted around me as nausea rose in my throat. I dropped the photograph back into the case and stumbled backward, pressing myself against the wall as if I could melt into it. My apartment felt wrong, poisoned by whoever had walked through it, touched my things, stood at my bedside. I thought about calling the police, but what would I even say? That I found an old briefcase with creepy photographs inside. That someone might have broken in. Without proof, they'd dismiss me as paranoid, and maybe I was. But the photograph in the case was real. The footprints on my floor were real. I stayed awake until dawn, sitting rigid in the corner of the room with every light turned on, too afraid to close my eyes. When the sun finally rose, its pale light did nothing to comfort me. The photograph was still there, sitting on top of the pile, proof that I was not alone. And that was when I realized the most horrifying truth of all. If someone could enter my apartment once, they could do it again. They could already be planning their next visit. I couldn't stand to look at the briefcase anymore. Every time I glanced in its direction, I felt my skin crawl, like the thing itself was alive. I thought if I destroyed it, maybe the nightmare would end. That morning, with trembling hands, I gathered every photograph from inside, stacked them in the sink, and struck a match. The flame licked at the edges, curling the glossy prints, devouring the ink, and turning faces into smudges of black. The smell of burning chemicals filled the kitchen, harsh and bitter, but I didn't stop. I watched until every photograph was reduced to ash, and then I doused the remains in water and flushed them down the drain. My chest felt lighter, as if I'd finally taken back some control. But when I woke up the next morning, my relief shattered. The briefcase was waiting for me on the kitchen table, the same as before. The photographs were back inside, not a single one burned, each picture pristine as though untouched. My hands shook as I flipped through them, my throat closing tighter with every turn. They weren't the same photos as before. Now there were more of me sitting on the couch, brushing my teeth, eating dinner, scrolling on my phone. The angles were so precise, so close, it felt impossible that someone had been inside without me hearing. I dropped the stack back into the case and stepped away. pressing my hand against my mouth to keep from screaming. Every photo meant someone was here, in my home, watching me without my knowledge. I thought back to the muddy footprints, to the photo of me asleep. My mind churned with questions I couldn't answer. Who was doing this? Why me? How were they getting inside? But what I found next shook me more than anything. Buried beneath the photos of me was a new set. These weren't of strangers in grocery stores or parks anymore. These were darker, uglier, a basement, dimly lit, with concrete walls stained in places I didn't want to imagine. And in the middle of it, a woman. Her wrists and ankles were bound with rope, her mouth gagged, her eyes were wide, terrified, filled with tears that glistened in the weak light. She wasn't someone I knew, yet the photograph felt real, horrifyingly real. My stomach twisted as I stared at her face. On the back of the photo, scrawled in thick black ink, was a single word. Next, the letters seemed to burn through the page, bold and final, like a promise. My knees went weak, and I sank into a chair, clutching the photo in my trembling hand. Whoever was behind this wasn't just watching, they were planning something violent. I wanted to deny it, to believe it was staged, a sick joke, but the fear in the woman's eyes told me it wasn't. I pressed my palms to my face, trying to block out the images, but it was useless. They were burned into me. I thought about going to the police again, about dumping the briefcase in their lap and demanding they handle it. But then I imagined their expressions, how they'd look at me like I was insane, like I'd faked everything. What if the briefcase just vanished before they saw it, the way the burned photos had returned? What if they didn't believe me until it was too late? The rest of the day passed in a haze of paranoia. I left every light on, checked every lock twice, then 3 times, but none of it mattered. I couldn't shake the thought that someone was already inside, hiding, waiting. My ears strained for any sound that didn't belong. My eyes darted to the shadows, expecting movement. The walls of my apartment, once a comfort, now felt like a cage closing tighter around me. That night, sleep was impossible. I sat in my chair, staring at the briefcase like it was a ticking bomb. My body ached with exhaustion, but I refused to close my eyes. Every so often I thought I heard a faint creak, a soft shuffle, the sound of something brushing against the floorboards. Each time, my chest seized, and I held my breath, waiting for the intruder to reveal themselves, but nothing ever came. As dawn approached, the silence was broken only by the hum of my refrigerator. I finally forced myself to check the briefcase again, almost hoping the photographs would be gone, proof that this was all in my head. But instead, there were more. A new stack, sitting neatly on top. The first few were still of me, snapped sometime during the night as I sat in my chair, eyes half closed with exhaustion. But then I reached the one that made my blood run cold. It was the same woman from before, the one tied up in that basement. Only now she looked worse, her eyes swollen from crying, her face streaked with dirt, her body slumped as though she had no strength left to fight. The ropes dug deeper into her skin. The photo was so detailed, so intimate, that I could almost hear her muffled sobs through the paper. My stomach twisted painfully as I turned the photo over, dreading what I'd find. On the back, in the same heavy ink, another word had been written. Soon the letters bled across the page, sharp and final. My hands trembled as I dropped the photograph back into the case, my pulse hammering so violently I thought I might faint. Whoever was doing this wasn't just showing me victims. They were leaving me a message, a countdown. And I had no idea if I was supposed to be the witness, the rescuer, or the next victim. I started to feel like my apartment was no longer mine. The air was different, heavy, as though every corner carried the weight of unseen eyes. No matter how many locks I checked or windows I sealed, the feeling of exposure clung to me like a second skin. I taped over the peephole on my door, hammered nails into the window frames, and even dragged furniture against the entrances. I thought it might bring me peace, but it didn't. Each measure only reminded me how desperate I was, how helpless. My apartment wasn't a safe place anymore. It was a stage, and I was being forced to perform for someone who never showed their face. The briefcase became the center of my torment. I tried ignoring it, leaving it untouched in the living room, but it always demanded my attention. Every time I returned to it, more photographs had been added. They grew darker with each day. Some showed strangers lying in pools of blood, their eyes staring blankly as if captured in their final moments. Others were blurry, frantic, like they'd been snapped in the middle of something violent. The horror in those pictures was undeniable, and the worst part was the perspective. They weren't distant, detached shots anymore. They were up close, intimate, taken as if the photographer had been standing over the bodies themselves. Then came the night I saw the shift. The stack of photographs began to include images that weren't just of strangers or victims anymore. They were of me, yes, but not like before. Not me brushing my teeth, not me sitting on the couch. These new photos felt different, wrong. They were angled as if I were the one behind the camera. In one, my hand seemed to be stretched forward, blurry in the frame, holding something sharp. In another, the angle caught the ground as though I was standing over someone, watching them collapse. My breath caught as I shuffled through them, my fingers trembling violently. I tried to convince myself it was a trick, that someone was staging these photos to make me believe I had done things I couldn't remember. But deep down, fear gnawed at me. What if I had done them? What if I was losing time, blacking out, becoming the monster behind the lens? I clutched my head, digging my nails into my scalp, trying to claw away the thought, but it wouldn't leave. The photographs felt like proof, evidence. They painted me as the villain in a story I didn't understand. Each time I looked at them, my sense of self fractured further. Was I the one being stalked, or was I the one doing the stalking without even knowing it? That night, unable to take it anymore, I tried throwing the briefcase away. I carried it down 3 flights of stairs, my arms shaking under its unnatural weight, and tossed it into the dumpster behind the building. I didn't look back. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. I climbed the stairs slowly, exhausted, drained, ready to collapse. But when I opened my apartment door, my heart stopped. The briefcase was sitting in the middle of the living room floor, waiting for me. I staggered backward, nearly falling against the wall, bile rising in my throat. The lid was open, photographs spilling out like they'd been waiting to be seen. My eyes darted toward the top one, and my knees almost gave way. It was the woman again. The one who had been tied up in the basement, the one marked as next and soon. But now, she wasn't bound anymore. Her limbs lay twisted at odd, unnatural angles, her eyes glazed over, lifeless. The ropes that had once restrained her were scattered on the floor beside her. She was gone, and the photograph captured every horrific detail. What froze me wasn't her body. It was the shadow stretching across her chest. My shadow, the angle was unmistakable. The outline of my shoulders, the shape of my head. It looked exactly as though I had been the one standing over her when the picture was taken. My blood ran cold as I dropped the photograph onto the pile, my hands trembling uncontrollably. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The walls of my apartment seemed to close in tighter, the silence suffocating me. I didn't know if I was losing my grip on reality, or if someone was carefully rewriting it around me, but the photographs left me no space for doubt. They told a story in which I was no longer just a victim. And as I sat there, staring at the briefcase, one horrible thought pressed harder and harder into my skull. Maybe I wasn't being framed. Maybe I wasn't innocent. Maybe I had done everything the photographs showed, and the briefcase was only reminding me of what I had forgotten. The more I tried to push the thought away, the louder it screamed in my mind. And in the silence of my apartment, surrounded by hundreds of images I couldn't explain, I realized I was no longer sure which terrified me more, that someone else was doing this to me, or that it was me all along. The days began to blur into each other after that. I no longer kept track of time. My blinds stayed drawn, the lights in my apartment burned without pause, and the outside world faded into something distant, almost unreal. I stopped going to work, stopped answering my phone. I existed only in the suffocating silence of those walls, with the briefcase as my constant companion. No matter where I tried to put it, shoved under the bed, buried in the closet, locked in the bathroom, it always found its way back into the center of the room, waiting. My sleep, what little I managed, came in broken fragments. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined footsteps creeping across the floor or the faint click of a camera shutter beside my bed. Sometimes I thought I actually heard it, sharp and quick, like a nail being driven into my skull. I would jolt awake, drenched in sweat, but the room was always empty, or at least it appeared to be. The photographs piled higher every day. At first I had tried to count them, but the number only made my chest tighten. I stopped counting when I realized there were more pictures of me than anything else. Hundreds of angles of my life, down to the smallest detail. Me chewing food, me staring blankly at the television, me holding my head in my hands. I couldn't understand how they kept appearing, who was behind them, or how the camera followed me without my noticing. The fear had stopped being sharp and sudden. It had grown into something constant, a dull sickness that never left. Then one evening, I found only 2 new photographs in the briefcase. That was different. I almost didn't want to look, but I couldn't stop myself. The first was of me, exactly as I was in that moment, sitting on the floor across from the briefcase. My body was hunched, my eyes wide and bloodshot, my hands frozen mid-motion as though caught in the act of reaching. It was like staring at a mirror, only worse because I had not seen or heard anyone take it. It meant the camera was here, hidden somewhere I couldn't detect, documenting me in real time. My stomach turned to ice as I picked up the second photograph. It was a crime scene. Yellow tape cordoned off an alley. Police officers clustered around a body sprawled on the ground. The angle was sharp, clinical, like the kind of photo that would appear in an evidence file. But what made me drop it with a strangled sound was the face of the body. It was me. My corpse lay pale and bloodied, eyes wide open, lips slack. The ground beneath me was dark with a stain that could only be blood. Even the clothes were the same as the ones I was wearing right then. It wasn't just a photograph, it felt like a prophecy. A snapshot of a future I couldn't stop. I sat frozen, my breath coming too fast. The photo lying face up on the floor as if mocking me. My thoughts unraveled into chaos. Was I being warned of my death? Was it already decided? Or was I already dead, trapped in some endless cycle of proof and memory? Nothing made sense anymore, not even my own fear. The room pressed in around me, the ticking of the clock unbearable, each second another step closer to the inevitable. I forced myself to my feet, searching every inch of the apartment for the camera I knew had to be hidden somewhere. I tore paintings off the walls, flipped over furniture, ripped open vents, clawed through every corner like a madman. But there was nothing. No lens, no wires, no sign of intrusion. And then I heard it, a soft click, the unmistakable sound of a camera shutter coming from the dark corner of my bedroom. My blood turned to ice. Slowly I turned my head, the shadows twisting in front of me. I couldn't see anything at first, just the dim outline of my furniture. But then I noticed it is shaped darker than the rest, as though the shadow itself had thickened. My eyes strained, trying to make sense of it, and in that heavy silence, the click came again. Another photograph had been taken. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding so hard I could barely breathe. The briefcase was still open in the living room, and as if mocking me, I saw a new photograph resting neatly on top of the pile. My hand shook as I reached for it, dread clawing up my spine. It was of me, standing in the bedroom doorway, staring directly at the camera. My face was pale, my eyes wide, my body tense with fear, the same fear I felt in that moment. The edges of my vision began to blur, my thoughts unraveling completely. I wanted to scream, to run, but the weight of inevitability pressed me into silence. I didn't know who was behind the lens. I didn't know if it was someone else, or if it had always been me. All I knew was that the photographs had shown me strangers, then victims, then myself. Step by step, the story had been written, and if the last photograph I had seen was to be believed, the ending had already been decided. I don't know if I'm still alive now or if I've already died and this is all that's left. What I do know is that the camera is still here. I can feel it even when I can't see it, watching, waiting, clicking in the dark. And sooner or later the briefcase will show me the final picture the exact moment my story ends.